The orbital platforms make no sense. That was the first note Scout ZX-427 recorded in their daily report. Through the advanced sensor array of their cloaked ship, they watched another cluster of human satellites deploy from a space station. Like everything else these peculiar beings created, the formation appeared random, inefficient, and yet purposeful. Request clarification on recent observations. The message from Central Command blinked across their neural interface. Human space development shows no correlation with standard civilization patterns. ZX-427's secondary hearts pulsed with frustration as they composed their response. How could they explain what they barely understood themselves? The humans were building something vast, but its purpose remained elusive. Observations confirm previous reports. They transmitted back. Humans continue to prioritize projects that serve no clear strategic or economic purpose. Latest deployment. Network of crystalline mirrors, positioned in what appears to be a Fibonacci spiral. Energy collection efficiency, 23% lower than standard models. Yet construction continues at accelerated pace. The Scout's sensors zoomed in on the latest mirror array. The crystals were imperfect by galactic standards, their surfaces etched with patterns that actually reduced their reflective capability. By all logic, they should be useless, but the humans had launched thousands of them, positioning each one with surprising precision. A new alert drew their attention. Far below, in a desert region, their database identified as Nevada. Another quantum receiver rose from the Earth. It joined dozens of others, all pointed at empty regions of space. No known signals originated from those coordinates. No resource-rich systems lay in those directions. No potential allies or threats existed along those vectors. Yet the humans built them, and they built them with an urgency that made ZX-427's protective scales bristle. Additional observation they added to their report. Human scientific facilities show increasing activity during night cycle. Energy usage in major research centers has tripled. Detected multiple references to Project Lighthouse in encrypted communications. The response from Central Command was immediate. Explain project objective. Unable to determine. ZX-427 replied. But pattern suggests coordination on global scale. Humans are sharing data between previously competitive nations. Research facilities in North America, Europe, and Asia all running similar experiments. Focus appears to be on quantum-level detection of something our instruments cannot identify. The Scout shifted their ship's position, using the planet's moon for additional sensor coverage. The view only added to their unease. Automated probes were launching from multiple sites, their trajectories carrying them toward the same empty regions the quantum receivers monitored. Most disturbing development, they continued, involves human historical records. Archaeological data shows similar construction patterns repeating throughout their history. Ancient stone circles, pyramid complexes, and cave paintings all share mathematical relationships with current satellite deployments. ZX-427 attached visual data showing the correlation. The humans were recreating something they had built before, many times, in increasingly sophisticated forms. Request evaluation. Central Command transmitted. Are humans threat to galactic security? The Scout studied their screens, watching the endless stream of activity below. The mirrors kept deploying. The receivers kept scanning. The probes kept launching, all of it following some pattern they couldn't quite grasp, like a melody played in frequencies their ears couldn't detect. Negative on direct threat assessment. They finally responded. But humans exhibit signs of preparing for something. Their actions suggest they can perceive or predict an event our civilization cannot detect. Recommend continued observation with elevated priority. These beings know something we don't. As if to emphasize their point, another cluster of crystalline mirrors blossomed in orbit, their etched surfaces catching the sun in ways that made them look less like technology and more like eyes watching the depths of space for the first sign of whatever humanity was expecting. Professor James Xavier, the identity ZX427 had borrowed, should have been unremarkable. The forged credentials were perfect, the backstory flawless. Yet Dr. Catherine Reynolds, head of quantum detection systems, kept watching them with an expression that made their camouflaged scales ripple beneath their holographic disguise. "You're here about the background radiation, aren't you?" she asked during their third meeting, her eyes never leaving their face. The patterns everyone else dismisses. 6427 managed a casual nod, their studied human gestures hiding internal alarm. They had said nothing about their true research focus. Among other things, they replied carefully. Catherine's face lit up with an intensity that made the scout's secondary heart skip. "Then you can see it too. The ripples in the static." Before they could respond, she was already leading them through a series of security checkpoints. Each door required multiple forms of biometric authentication, far more security than a simple research lab should need. The final chamber made all of ZX427's scientific training scream in protest. The equipment was wrong. Quantum sensors aligned in configurations that violated basic physics, crystalline matrices that matched the orbital mirrors, their surfaces etched with patterns that should have rendered them useless. And in the center, a holographic display showing what appeared to be random noise. Except it wasn't random. Not entirely. "Watch," Catherine said, adjusting controls with practiced precision. "Most people see nothing but static, but if you filter it just right." The display shifted. The static remained, but now ZX427 could see something. A rhythm. A pulse. Like waves breaking on a shore that didn't exist. "We started detecting it 50 years ago," Catherine continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But the really strange thing, when we went back through historical data, we found evidence that humans have been detecting it for thousands of years. We just didn't have the technology to understand what we were sensing." She pulled up another display, this one showing ancient cave paintings. The swirls and patterns, when overlaid with the quantum static, matched perfectly. "Our ancestors could see it," she said. "They built their holy sites along its strongest points, created art that mapped its movements, passed down stories about the great wave that comes when the pattern peaks." ZX427 fought to maintain their composure. Their own civilization had studied quantum mechanics for 10,000 years. They had mapped every fluctuation, every particle dance. This pattern simply couldn't exist. Yet here it was, pulsing on the screen. And more worryingly, it was changing. "The amplitude is increasing," Catherine said, answering their unspoken question. "That's why we're racing to get the mirror network completed. We need full coverage before." She caught herself, but ZX427 could see the fear behind her professional demeanor. Before what? Before the pattern peaks. She pulled up a final display, a simple sine wave that made the scouts' blood run cold. "We've mapped out the historical cycle. If we're right, we have less than 2 years before the biggest surge in recorded history." ZX427 started composing their report right there, not even waiting to return to their ship. "Humans detecting unknown quantum phenomenon. Evidence suggests long-term evolution of sensitivity to these signals. All current space development appears connected to monitoring and responding to this pattern." They hesitated before adding the final line. "Request immediate analysis of historical records for similar phenomena in other sectors. If humans are correct about this cycle, the entire galaxy may be unprepared for what comes next." As if in response, the static on the central display pulsed once, strong enough that even ZX427's unmodified senses could detect it. For a brief moment, they could have sworn they saw something moving in the noise, like a vast shape shifting just below the surface of reality. Catherine was still watching them, that same knowing look in her eyes. You can see it too, can't you? We're not crazy. We're not imagining things. Something's coming, and we need to be ready. From their observation point above, the North American continent, Zix 427 watched the world transform. The first signs appeared at dawn in major cities, massive blast doors rising from hidden foundations, seamlessly integrating with existing infrastructure. By noon, underground transport systems that had been built in secret for decades began operating. The Scouts' sensors detected similar activities on every continent, a choreographed dance of preparation that must have required generations of planning. Update on human activity required. Central Command's message flashed with priority markers. Explain mass population movements. Zix 427's third eye twitched as they composed their response. Preliminary analysis suggests implementation of long-term survival strategy. Humans are activating pre-positioned resources and infrastructure. Most concerning, they appear to be following a timeline we cannot see. In Mexico City, a massive elevator shaft breached the surface, its construction unlike anything in the Scouts' database. Similar structures emerged in Lagos, Mumbai, and Sydney. These weren't crude evacuation centers. They were gateways to something far more sophisticated. Sending visual data, Zix 427 continued. Underground complexes show signs of advanced quantum shielding. Shield frequency matches pattern detected in orbital arrays. Hypothesis: all human construction of past century may have been components of single unified project. Below, the population movement continued with eerie precision. No panic. No chaos. Families calmly following pre-assigned routes. Children carrying bags they had clearly packed and practiced with. This wasn't a sudden response. This was the implementation of a plan rehearsed across generations. A priority alert drew their attention to the Pacific Ocean. A hidden installation was rising from the depths, water cascading from crystal spires that perfectly matched the orbital network. The Scouts' sensors detected similar structures emerging in every major body of water. Additional data point they transmitted. Discovered human information protocol called Project Noah. References to waves appear in multiple languages and contexts, unable to determine if term is literal or metaphorical. The response from Central Command was immediate. Share basis for assessment. Zix 427 hesitated. Their next words would forever change how their civilization viewed humanity. Evidence suggests humans have been preparing for this event since before they developed written language. Found identical warning symbols in cave paintings, religious texts, and modern computer code. They attached images, ancient petroglyphs showing waves that matched the quantum static pattern. Medieval manuscripts depicting cities with underground shelters. Children's songs with melodies that, when analyzed, contained the same mathematical sequences as the crystal arrays. Most significant finding, they added, involves human neural structure. Preliminary scans show unusual quantum sensitivity in brain tissue. Hypothesis: humans may have evolved to detect threat our instruments cannot measure. As if to underscore their point, a new pattern of movement caught their attention. In every major city, small groups of humans were taking up positions around the crystal spires. Their actions seemed ritualistic, almost religious, yet their equipment was undeniably advanced. Urgent update. Zix 427 transmitted. Human scientists now gathering at key points globally. Detected phrase repeated in multiple languages. The waves are getting closer. Request immediate. They never finished the transmission. Their sensors suddenly registered a pulse of something. A ripple in reality that made their ship's instruments momentarily flash with nonsense readings. When the systems recovered, the scout noticed every human had stopped moving at the exact same moment, all of them looking up at the sky. Final observation, they wrote, their appendages trembling slightly. Humans are not acting like a species facing an unknown threat. They are acting like a species that has survived this before. Request permission to break protocol and make direct contact. Whatever they know, whatever they can sense, we need to understand it before it's too late. In the cities below, the crystal spires began to hum with a frequency that shouldn't have been possible, their resonance matching the pulse that even now echoed through the scouts' advanced sensors. The waves, whatever they were indeed getting closer. The ancient scroll crumbled at the edges despite the archive's preservation field. Zix 427, still maintaining their Professor James Xavier disguise, leaned forward to study the faded text. Their universal translator struggled with the archaic Latin, but certain phrases burned through with terrifying clarity. When the stars ripple like water, they read aloud, and the void between spaces grows thin. You're reading it wrong, a voice said behind them. Cardinal Michael Rivera stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The original Aramaic translates more precisely to when reality becomes fluid. Zix 427's holographic disguise nearly flickered from shock. The Cardinal wasn't supposed to be here, and that text wasn't supposed to exist. The scout had found references to it in classified files, a supposedly lost document from the 3rd century that described the Great Dissolution. Fascinating translation. The scout managed, their voice steady despite their racing hearts. Are there other copies? Hundreds, Cardinal Rivera said, moving into the room. Every major religion has their version. The Hindus called it the unraveling of Maya. Buddhist texts speak of the time when forms become formless. The Aboriginal Australians painted it in their Dreamtime stories. He pulled out an ancient clay tablet, its surface covered in cuneiform script. The Sumerians were perhaps the most direct. They simply called it the wave that unmakes. Zix 427 started recording everything, their hidden sensors working at maximum capacity. These are just myths, they said, testing the Cardinal's response. Religious allegories. Are they? Rivera smiled, touching the tablet gently. Then why do all these myths include the same mathematical formulas? Why do their warning symbols match the quantum interference patterns we're detecting now? The scout's third eye widened behind its holographic shield. We? The Cardinal's smile deepened. Come with me, Professor. There's something you should see. They descended through layers of the archives, past sections that shouldn't have existed, until they reached a chamber that made Zix 427's scientific training short-circuit. The walls were lined with crystal matrices identical to the ones being launched into orbit, but these were ancient, their surfaces carved by hands that had turned to dust millennia ago. The Church's real mission, Rivera said, has always been preservation, not just of faith, but of warning signs. Every cathedral in Europe was built on sites where the quantum disturbances are strongest. Every biblical description of angels, early attempts to describe what humans see when reality starts to thin. He activated a hidden panel, and the ancient crystals hummed to life. The same pattern that had haunted the scouts' recent observations danced across the walls. Your people aren't the first to study us, the Cardinal continued casually. But you might be the first to figure it out in time. We've been trying to warn everyone for centuries, but how do you explain something like this? How do you tell advanced civilizations that their instruments are blind to a force that prehistoric humans could see? Zix 427 abandoned pretense. How long have you known what I am? Since you arrived. The crystals resonate differently around non-human life. Rivera's expression turned grave. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that you understand. Everything we've built. Every prayer, every ritual, every primitive custom. They're all parts of a warning system, a message passed down through 100 forms to survive any catastrophe. The scouts' appendages trembled as they composed their most critical report yet. Urgent update. Human religious institutions appear to be sophisticated warning archives. Historical records indicate multiple previous reality-altering events. Evidence suggests human culture specifically evolved to preserve critical information through multiple parallel systems. Rivera watched them work, then said softly, "The wave is coming again, bigger than ever before. We've prepared as best we can, but the universe is about to remember how fluid reality can be. The question is, will your people listen to a warning written in prayer and myth, or will they trust only their instruments until it's too late?" "I was wondering when you'd drop the disguise," Dr. Jack Morrison said without looking up from his displays. "The hologram must be uncomfortable." Zix-427 stood in their true form for the first time since arriving on Earth, their crystalline exoskeleton catching the light from the underground facility's quantum monitors. "How long have you known?" "Since the beginning." Morrison finally turned, his eyes reflecting the same knowing look the scout had seen in Catherine Reynolds and Cardinal Rivera. "We've been tracking your kind since you entered the solar system. Not with technology. We just feel the displacement you create in the quantum field." The massive chamber around them hummed with energy. Crystalline spires rose from floor to ceiling, their patterns matching both the orbital arrays and the ancient formations in the Vatican archives. But these were different, more complex, more alive. "You're not just monitoring the waves," Zix-427 realized. "You're trying to interact with them, finally asking the right questions." Morrison gestured to a central platform. "Come here. I want to show you what human children can see before they learn to ignore it." The platform activated as they approached, projecting a field that made the scouts' sensors scream in protest. Reality seemed to ripple around them, like looking through water that shouldn't exist. "Humans never evolved to be stronger or faster," Morrison explained, adjusting controls with practiced ease. "We evolved to survive something far more fundamental. Our nervous systems developed a quantum sensitivity that your species would consider impossible." The field intensified, and Zix-427 felt their molecular structure begin to resonate. The sensation was both terrifying and fascinating. "This is how you perceive reality." "All the time," Morrison nodded. "Every human feels it differently. Some see colors that don't exist. Others hear frequencies that shouldn't be possible. The ancient ones called it the voice of God or the songs of angels. We just call it the wave." He pulled up historical data streams, showing patterns that stretched back through human history. Every few thousand years, reality, hiccups, the quantum fabric that holds everything together gets turbulent. Most species never notice until it's too late. Their civilizations just vanish, leaving behind empty ruins that don't make sense to the next observers. But humans survived, Zix-427 said, their scientific mind racing to process the implications. "We did more than survive." Morrison's voice carried a pride that made the scouts' scales ripple. "We learned to feel it coming. Built warning systems into our bodies, our culture, our very identity as a species. Every human child who's ever been afraid of the dark. They're sensing the void between spaces. Every artist who's painted swirling stars. They're recording wave patterns." He brought up one final display, a real-time map of the local galaxy. Points of light marked what the scout recognized as dead worlds, places where civilization had simply stopped. "Those weren't natural extinctions," Morrison said softly. "They were ships that didn't see the storm coming. And now we're facing the biggest wave in recorded history, one that could reshape the entire galaxy." Zix-427 began composing their most critical report yet, not caring about protocol or security. Emergency update. Humans possess evolution-based quantum sensory capability. All cultural and technological development appears designed around wave detection and survival. Request immediate. The words died in their neural interface as every crystal in the chamber suddenly pulsed in unison. Morrison's face went pale. "It's starting," he whispered. "Faster than we predicted. Your people, your whole civilization. They need to know now. The wave isn't just coming. It's already here. The question is, will they trust the warning of a primitive species in time to save themselves?" The scout felt it then, through the resonance field. A vast movement in reality itself, like standing on a beach as the tide pulls back before a tsunami. And for the first time, they understood the true meaning of fear. The crystal chamber's walls rippled like living mercury as Dr. Morrison led Zix 427 deeper into the facility. Each step brought new waves of quantum distortion that made the scout's sensors flutter between reality and static. "What you're feeling now," Morrison said, his hand resting on a control panel that seemed to phase in and out of existence, "is what every human experiences during childhood. Most of you's learn to filter it out. Some never do. We call them sensitives, and they're the backbone of our warning system. Your species modified itself." Zix 427 asked, their third eye tracking the strange movements in the air around them. Morrison laughed, the sound echoing oddly through the fluctuating space. "Not intentionally. We evolved this way because the ones who couldn't sense the waves didn't survive the last great shift. Natural selection on a quantum scale." The central core opened before them, a vast spherical chamber filled with interconnected crystal matrices. At its center, a holographic display showed the universe as Zix 427 had never seen it, layers of reality peeling back to reveal the quantum foam beneath. "Reality isn't stable," Morrison explained, his voice taking on a professor's tone. "The universe breathes, expands and contracts not just in space, but in dimensional frequency. Every few thousand years, these oscillations peak. The barriers between possible states of matter break down. Whole civilizations can be rewritten." The display shifted, showing historical data that made the scouts' hearts stutter. Entire star systems where the laws of physics had simply changed. Species that had existed one day and been retconned out of reality the next. "Your people's sensors are perfect for a stable universe," Morrison continued, "but they're blind to the flutter, the quantum heartbeat that warns of coming changes. Humans, we feel it in our bones. It's why our art often seems chaotic, why our music sometimes hits notes that shouldn't exist." Zix 427 watched as the display showed the current wave building. It was like nothing in their scientific database, a cascade of quantum state changes that would sweep through the galaxy like a reality storm. "The last major shift was during Earth's Bronze Age," Morrison said, pulling up archaeological data. "Most of our technology was lost, but the warning systems we built into our culture, the myths, the songs, the religious practices, they survived. When we rebuilt, the knowledge was still there, waiting in our stories and symbols." "The crystal arrays," Zix 427 said, understanding finally dawning. "They're not just sensors, they're stabilizers. Now you're getting it." Morrison's face lit up with fierce pride. "We can't stop the wave, but we can ride it. Create safe zones where reality remains real. The ancient Egyptians did it with their pyramids, the Mayans with their temples. Now we do it with orbital arrays and quantum fields." The scouts started composing a message to their superiors, then stopped. How could they explain this? That the species they dismissed as primitive had been surfing the waves of reality since before they had written language. "Your civilization needs to prepare," Morrison said softly. "The coming wave is orders of magnitude larger than anything in our records. Our models show it could rewrite up to 30% of the galaxy's quantum states without protection. He left the sentence unfinished. A crystal spire near them suddenly pulsed, its surface showing ripples that shouldn't have been possible in solid matter. Morrison's face went ashen. "That's the third harmonic resonance," he said, moving to the controls with urgent purpose. "The wave is accelerating. We need to begin the stabilization protocol now." "How long?" Zix-427 asked, their voice carrying an unfamiliar tremor. "Hours, maybe less. Your people need to choose quickly. Accept help from the primitive humans, or face the greatest reality storm in known history alone. And trust me," he added, as the very air around them began to shimmer with quantum instability. "You don't want to face this one alone." The message from Zix-427's homeworld arrived as reality began to bend. Initial readings confirm human predictions. The text scrolled across their neural interface. Wave detection systems now online. Situation critical. Request immediate protocol for defense. In Project Lighthouse's command center, Dr. Morrison read the message over the scout's shoulder, his expression grim. They're seeing it now, but they're looking in the wrong direction. The wave doesn't travel through normal space. It moves through probability itself. Around them, the crystal arrays pulsed with increasing urgency. Teams of human scientists moved with practiced precision, their actions choreographed by generations of preparation. On the main display, the quantum distortions were becoming visible even to unmodified sensors. "Your people have the technology we need," Morrison said, his fingers dancing across control surfaces. "But we have the knowledge to use it correctly. Without both, neither of us survives what's coming." The scout transmitted another message. "Human shield technology ready for implementation. Request immediate resource allocation." The response was swift, but troubling. "Insufficient evidence for full deployment. Request additional data." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Still want proof? Show them this." He activated the facility's deep space sensors, revealing a sight that made Zix-427's external scales contract in horror. The nearest star cluster was shifting, not in physical space, but in possibility space. Stars that had existed for billions of years were flickering between different quantum states, their very nature becoming fluid. "That's just the leading edge," Morrison said softly. "The main wave will rewrite the basic laws of physics in any region it touches, unless we create stability zones together." Zix-427 transmitted the sensor data, adding their own urgent note: "Observable reality breakdown in progress. Human predictions verified. Requesting emergency authorization for full cooperation." The wait for a response felt like eternity, made worse by the visible distortions now rippling through the air around them. When it finally came, the message was different, from a higher authority than the scout had ever contacted before. "Authorization granted, but conditions apply. Explain human requirements." Morrison read the message and nodded. "Tell them our terms, their crystal technology combined with our quantum fields. But most importantly, they have to help us preserve the warning systems, all of them. The myths, the religions, the cultural practices they think are primitive. Humanity didn't survive this long by relying on any single method of information transfer." As the scout transmitted these terms, emergency alerts began flooding in from across the galaxy. Other civilizations were finally detecting the wave, but for many, it was already too late. Entire sectors were going dark, as reality itself became negotiable. The response from home carried the highest priority marker Zix-427 had ever seen. Terms accepted. Initiating emergency transport of crystal matrices. Human guidance required for installation. Morrison was already moving. "Get your people to send everything to these coordinates." He transmitted a series of locations. "They're the resonance points we've mapped over millennia. the places where reality has the strongest foundation. The scout watched as humanity's hidden infrastructure revealed itself. Ancient sites around the planet activated, their true purpose finally clear. The orbital arrays aligned into configurations that had been planned for centuries. One more thing, Morrison added, his eyes on the approaching wave. Tell them to watch the children. In every species, the young ones can always feel it first. If we survive this, that knowledge might save us all next time. Zix-427 sent the message, then asked the question that had been building since this began. How did your species handle the fear, knowing this was coming? Morrison's answer was interrupted by a pulse that shook the fabric of space-time itself. On every screen, the wave's main body became visible, a tsunami of shifting reality that made the previous distortions look like ripples in a pond. We'll have to continue this discussion later, he said, moving to the central control station. Right now, we have about 10 minutes to save 2 civilizations. Let's hope your people can work as fast as they can think. Reality settled like disturbed water finding its level. Zix-427 stood before the High Council, their crystalline forms still resonating with echoes of the wave that had nearly unmade everything. The chamber's ancient walls now held new additions, human warning symbols etched alongside traditional markings, their quantum-sensitive patterns, a permanent testament to how close they'd come to oblivion. Proceed with your final assessment, the first speaker commanded. The human defense strategy succeeded beyond all projections. Zix-427 began. Combined shield coverage protected 37 major systems. In areas where the wave made contact, reality shifts were contained within acceptable parameters. The display behind them showed the changed galaxy. Nearly a quarter of known space had been rewritten. Stars with different histories, planets that had always been empty, species that now never existed. But in the protected zones, both human and scout civilizations had endured. More significantly, they continued. We now understand why humans evolved so differently from other species. Their Earth experienced minor reality waves regularly, creating environmental pressure for quantum sensitivity. What we saw as primitive superstition was actually an incredibly sophisticated warning system, designed to survive any level of technological regression. The second speaker leaned forward, explained the current implementation. Zix-427 activated their neural link, showing the new defense grid. Human crystal arrays merged with scout technology created a network of reality anchors, each one tuned to the frequencies they'd nearly learned too late to detect. The humans call it Project Lighthouse 2.0, they explained. But its true innovation isn't technological. They insisted we implement their cultural preservation methods. Every crystal hub contains a complete record of both our civilizations, not just technical data, but stories, songs, art, and religious texts. If the system ever falls, the warning will survive in 1,000 different forms. The third speaker's voice carried a note of wonder. They planned for failure even in success. Yes, Zix-427's external scales shifted in what they'd learned was a very human expression of pride. Dr. Morrison explained it best. Technology can fail, but a good story lives forever. They've already begun teaching our children their methods of quantum sensing. In return, we're helping them expand their crystal engineering. The display shifted to show new construction throughout both civilizations' territory. Hybrid structures rose on 100 worlds, each one a combination of advanced technology and ancient warning systems. In orbit around Earth, the Scouts people were learning to build better sensors by understanding human art. But the most remarkable discovery, Zix-427 continued, was finding other survivors. Scattered through the galaxy, we've identified 17 species that evolved similar warning systems. The humans are already reaching out to them, creating what they call the Lighthouse Network. The first speaker's crystal core pulsed with interest. Your recommendation: full integration of human warning protocols at all levels of our civilization. Their methods seem redundant, even wasteful, until you understand their true purpose. They don't just preserve information. They preserve the ability to understand that information, even if a society has to start over from nothing. As if to emphasize their point, a child's song drifted in from the chamber's antechamber, one of the new nursery rhymes that taught quantum harmonics through simple melodies. The same information was encoded in the chamber's decorative patterns, in the stories parents now told their young, and in games that taught reality wave detection through play. The humans have a saying, Zix 427 concluded. They tell their children, "Listen to the stars singing." We always thought it was primitive mysticism. Now we know it's the most advanced warning system ever created, one that can survive the end of civilization itself. The council chambers fell silent as the implications settled. Finally, the first speaker raised all four hands in the new gesture they'd learned from humanity, a sign of both respect and wonder. It seems, they said, that the humans knew something we needed to learn. Update the archives. From this day forward, Earth is classified not as an emerging world, but as a primary source of survival knowledge. The age of pure technology is over. The time of combined wisdom has begun.